Thank you so much for being here. My name is Leslie Pusey, and I am the Honors Program Coordinator. And if you are unfamiliar with the Flash Lectures, it is a series where we invite faculty across campus to present briefly on a topic of their choosing, hopefully something unique or funny or maybe even controversial. We just want your lunches to be a little more academic in nature, proposing new ideas, fun thoughts. Today we have Prentiss Clark, English faculty, and she will talk to us a little bit about how we should live. So without further ado, please welcome Prentiss Clark.
So this lecture really is not a lecture. Ralph Waldo Emerson, the 19th century philosopher, essayist, and American transcendentalist, suggests that what we can truly receive from other persons is not instruction, but provocation. So what I'm going to do for the next 5 minutes, I'm going to offer you a series of questions and quotations that students and I have been exploring in a course that I'm currently teaching, and it's called Investigating the Ethical Life in Literature. So, what makes a human life significant, ethical, meaningful? These questions are sometimes considered the province of formal philosophy, yet these questions are equally the province of any ordinary human life. Ralph Waldo Emerson calls them questions that touch mankind nearest. So you might think of them as your pressing questions. What are the questions you're asking yourselves on a daily basis? What questions really matter? What do you want to know the meaning of? Questions, for example, about the meanings of freedom, knowledge, love, and moral obligation. And one of the sort of guiding ideas, or you might say working hypotheses in our course, is that literature, short fiction, poetry, essays, formal philosophy, film, drama, can help us to raise these questions, so quite literally find words for these questions, and then also navigate these questions, perhaps not answer them, but at least wrestle with them. So a student asks, how does literature function as a conversation starter or as one side of a conversation? And something that was really interesting that happened the first week of class is sort of asking students to write on a piece of paper, how do you define ethics? Right, so take a word that we sort of tend to sort of take as a given, right, a word that we sort of assume we know the meaning of, and then ask ourselves to define that word. Knowledge, wonder, freedom, experience, immersion, intimacy, love, perception, truth, commitment, responsibility, fear, responsiveness, insight, blindness, obligation. How do we define these terms? How do different writers define these terms? How do you live these terms in your daily life? Words. How do we define freedom? One student asks, how does freedom expand and contract aside from political law? Here's a response from W.E.B. Du Bois, author of The Souls of Black Folk in 1903. Du Bois says, freedom, the long sought we still seek, the freedom of life and limb, the freedom to work and think, the freedom to love and aspire, as a definition of freedom. How can creative literature be used to fight for human rights, one student asks. Here's a response, perhaps, from Gloria Anzaldúa, author of Borderlands, La Frontera. Anzaldúa suggests that nothing happens in the real world unless it first happens in the images in our heads. I seek new images of identity, new beliefs about ourselves, our humanity and worth no longer in question. Does knowledge, this is one student asking, does knowledge free a person, or does it entrap them to a certain mode of thinking? Another student asks, why are we as humans obsessed with quantifying everything? There are most certainly unquantifiable aspects of life, and in our attempt to make them tangible, we limit what can be gained from examining those aspects. Another student asks, what place does love have in knowledge? Or perhaps you could say, what place does knowledge have in love? Or the other way around. One student asks, does or can love preface moral knowledge or action? Here are some responses from Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry Bugbee. Ralph Waldo Emerson suggests that a mind might ponder its thought for ages and not gain so much self-knowledge as the passion of love shall teach it in a day. Henry Bugbee, American 20th century philosopher, suggests that in love and by virtue of love, we come to know the emptiness and the fullness of the world. A great question that the student had after a discussion of Henry James's The Beast in the Jungle the other day. She said, what if love is standing right in front of me and I can't see it? Is it possible for me to enable myself or teach myself to see it? Are we able to sort of overcome see our own sort of limitations? How is that possible? When we were discussing sort of the word ethics, one student said, and she's a daughter of a lawyer, and she said, I've heard the word ethics so many times, but I've never actually tried to define it, and I've never actually sort of asked myself, what does it mean? She said, do I pay attention to ethics in my everyday life? When do I notice ethical situations? Why? Nikolai Hartmann, German philosopher, he says of the ethical question, how ought I to live? He says it grows out of what is next to us, out of the current of everyday life, not less than out of life's great decisive moments with which the individual is occasionally confronted. Another student, after reading a story, and she sort of came into class and she said, oh my gosh, this is my life. Just sort of struck with how much the story spoke to her experience. She said, do we choose literature at times of our own moral dilemmas, or you might say sort of more broadly, at times of our own crises? Or does literature choose us? And so I'll leave you with Henry David Thoreau. The book exists for us perchance, which will explain our miracles and reveal new ones. The at present unutterable things we may find somewhere uttered. So that question, how shall I live? Perhaps one can, as Emily Dickinson suggests, dwell in possibility. Continue the reading, thinking, writing, and wondering that makes it possible to raise this question, how shall I live, in the first place? Questions? Ask Thomas the philosopher cat. Thank you. I'm happy if you have questions about the course or what students have been asking to talk a little bit more about that. If anyone